Willy, Paul. Oh, wait a minute. You're not Paul. Louis,
no, I'm
welcome.
Louis. I'm kind of a cheap version of Paul with less hair and an accent.
You know what? We're going to tell Paul we prefer it that way. We'll ask him to come on and bring more of an accent. Louis, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
It's going to be fun.
And Willy, you're joining us from Toronto today.
I am, somewhere deep inside our beautiful broadcasting center. Louis, so great to have you. This week is the Eastern Townships takeover of 2 blocks from the White House.
So for anyone who does not know, Louis Blouin is our colleague at Radio Canada here in the United States. He hangs out with us at our offices, which of course are 2 blocks from the White House. And this week we're going to talk about 2 international elections where Donald Trump loomed large.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Canada too, now Mark Carney has his majority stable government until 2029. All he needed is 3 by-election wins and 5 floor crossers, and that's what he got.
And there you
More
go.
power now.
And over the weekend in Hungary, a continent away, there was a major defeat. Viktor Orbán out after 16 years and a huge endorsement from President Donald Trump.
You know, Donald Trump's name wasn't technically on the ballot in either country, but his brand and his politics did play a role. And so today for our conversation, we're going to explore, are there parallels between his perceived unpopularity abroad and some of the challenges he's facing at home? So today, we're talking about the Trump factor, exploring how Trump's touch is backfiring in some places. I'm Katie Simpson.
I'm Louis Blouin.
And I'm Willy Lowry.
And we are 2 blocks from the White House.
The world is more divided and dangerous. The impacts of foreign conflicts and accelerating technological change are increasingly being felt here at home. And Canada's new government will continue to focus on what we can control.
Now that he has a majority government, Mark Carney has more leverage and more breathing room to navigate what he described there as a dangerous and divided world. The Liberals picked up all 3 seats that were up for grabs in by-elections this week. Louis, how does the Trump factor, what does that have to do with Carney now being able to clinch his majority?
It's funny because I was speaking to a senior Liberal source last night, and I asked, is Trump still useful for you guys? And the answer was kind of funny, as long as he does crazy things, he's very useful to us. And, that's what they feel. As long as Trump takes, tough decisions on all sorts of things, or he posts pictures of himself, pictures as Jesus, stuff like that, they feel it's useful to them. And the source presented to me, the strategy kind of in the anti-Trump coalition, in a way that they're there to fight Trump policies.
Even though he's not on the ballot.
Exactly. And again, we saw it now. They're going to slash the excise tax on gas until September. So reacting directly to Trump policies, but also anti-Trump coalition in a sense that they are against also his style of politics. So they're using that, to compare Poilievre to Trump and to poach his MPs and, do some parallels and bridges like that. And clearly it's very useful to them because they won 3 by-elections Monday night.
And Willy, this is the fact that we are in this moment. There is another Liberal majority government. Sort of walk us through how we got here, because this really is a dramatic turn of events.
Yeah, seemingly a little more than a year ago, we were racing towards a conservative government. And then the 51st state comments really flipped the entire equation here in Canada on its head. The Conservative Party went from a 25-point lead to obviously a somewhat distant second place. And in the year since, they've now lost 4 MPs, and there's also been a NDP who's crossed the floor. So really the Liberals are gaining power not just through by-elections, but also through closed-door meetings with Conservative and, in some cases, NDP MPs as well.
What about you, Katie? What do you think of the impact on the voting patterns in Canada?
I think that no one can ignore Donald Trump. He's always in the public. He's always in front of cameras. He's always posting something online. And that has become just part of the everyday political equation. And so because his decisions, whether they are whether he's making threats or following through on the threats or pulling back or whatever it is he's doing, because his presence is so significant, you can't ignore it. And
Imposing a rhythm, right? It's just like
exactly. It's constantly there. So whether people want to ignore him and tune him out, you can't really do it, right? And so he becomes a useful foil when it comes to politics. And it clearly, we're clearly seeing it from the Liberals that, are they campaigning against Pierre Poilievre or are they campaigning against Donald Trump?
Yep.
You can't just blame everything, though, on Donald Trump. There are, of course, there are significant challenges when it comes to, Canadian domestic politics. And when we talk about, Pierre Poilievre, having some challenges in terms of caucus management, our colleagues in Ottawa have been covering that quite extensively. The NDP, they have the problems of their own, too. And we've seen floor crossers from both parties. So there are domestic challenges. You can't just, get one big paintbrush and say Trump, 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 as much as a lot of people do. But you can't ignore his impact on what's going on here.
And there's no question, right, that the 51st state comments is kind of what kicked all of this off, and that we've had these conversations now over the last 14 months really centered around national unity. Louis, can you take us through a little bit of what that's meant in Quebec?
Yeah, the impact was pretty significant in Quebec politics. And starting with independentist parties in Quebec who felt the impact the most. Go back to the general election last year. The Bloc Québécois lost a third of its seats because, he had in front of him Carney talking about standing up to Trump and the necessity to be united against the threat coming from the southern border. And again, in Terrebonne, we knew it would be a tight race. But again, the Bloc Québécois lost by about a margin of 700 votes. The Liberals wanted it badly. They wanted to show that they are still a pool in Quebec, because that's Quebec who elected Carney last time, gave him his majority in a sense. So they wanted to prove that. But still, it's not a good sign for the Bloc Québécois or the Parti québécois, because the electors in Quebec are sending a signal like they want stability, that's what they want, continuity for the next few years. And also, if you look at the provincial election coming up the next fall, big implication for the Parti québécois of Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon. He is still leading in the polls, but he lost some feathers in the last few months, and he felt the need to adapt his referendum strategy. So he was promising, and he still is, a referendum in the first mandate, but he tweaked it a little bit. Oh, maybe we can wait until Trump is out of power. So it's a direct acknowledgement that there's an impact, that people are worried, are focused on economic issues these days and not on referendum. So it's going to be an interesting pattern there. But again, Trump factor, it's there.
Okay, so there is another big election that everyone is talking about. And unlike in Canada with the by-elections, the Trump administration actually got behind a candidate. Trump has long admired Viktor Orbán, Hungary's prime minister. So, Willy, what happened in Hungary over the weekend?
Essentially, 16 years of Orbán was, voted out quite decisively with Hungarians voting 53% for Peter Magyar. He won 138 of 199 seats. So really a super majority there. And it comes despite the Trump administration really stumping hard for Orbán. Just last week, J.D. Vance flew to Hungary to hold a rally for Orbán. He called President Trump while at the rally in a really kind of bizarre moment.
And the first time he called, I think he hit the voicemail when J.D. Vance called.
I think
the president had to call
I think
back.
He was like, JD, I'm busy. Let's take a listen, because it was quite an extraordinary moment.
Mr. President, you are on with about 5,000 Hungarian patriots, and I think they love you even more than they love Viktor Orbán.
Well, I can't believe that. Because I love Hungary and I love that Viktor. I'll tell you, he's a fantastic man. We've had a tremendous relationship, and he does a job. Remember this. He didn't allow people to storm your country and invade your country like other people have and ruin their countries, frankly.
So, interesting there, right, guys? Obviously taking another not so thinly veiled swipe at Europe, something that he has done repeatedly over the course of the last 15 months. But he also really, he went to bat for Orbán and really exposed himself to this potential fallout.
This is sort of off topic, but when JD Vance
No such
says
thing, Katie.
when JD Vance said, "Mr. President, you're on with about 5,000 Hungarian patriots," it reminds me of when you pick up the phone and say, "You're on speaker with someone here. Make sure you watch what you're going to say."
There's somebody in the car with me.
You're on speaker. Hello, we're driving together. It gave me that vibes. But Louis, why is this such a big deal for politics in America right now to watch what just happened?
I think there's three big warnings for Trump with what happened and the fact the defeat of Orbán. First of all, is that stunt didn't work. Even like a few days before the election, which is kind of extraordinary. Let's just mention that. So the pull that they hoped to have on Hungarian people wasn't there. Like this election really came from the streets. It didn't come from an ally elsewhere in the world. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that Peter Magyar was elected on domestic and economic issues. That's what mattered to people. He said, I'm going to tackle the stagnant economy in Hungary. That's what we're going to try to focus on. We're going to try to unlock that money from the European Union. We're going to try to make your lives better. As Orbán, at the same time, was campaigning while saying, oh, be careful, we're going to be dragged in the Ukraine war, on foreign issues. And clearly it didn't work. So for Donald Trump, who is now, the two hands in the Middle East, big time, talking about Cuba, there was the Venezuela operation. And when you look at the polls, people are worried about cost of living, having access to housing, the bills. That's what matters to them. So I think there's a warning sign there for Trump that, domestic issues, economic issues these days really matter, and the focus needs to be there. But again, we're being distracted by all sorts of things here in the U.S. at the moment. So I think that's the thing. And the last thing, I guess, it's just erosion of power. So Orbán spent 16 years in power, not Donald Trump. But at the same time, Donald Trump is so present. He's everywhere in the media. He's sucking oxygen all day long. People could get tired of that, of seeing him and hearing and everything. So that's where I think there's some warnings that come into play for them.
Tired of Trump? Never heard of that.
No,
never heard people say that
never,
before.
no.
One thing a Canadian audience may not realize is just how Donald Trump is modeling, particularly his second term, after the way that Viktor Orbán was able to consolidate power in Hungary. Steve Bannon, who is a longtime advisor of Donald Trump, he's not an advisor right now, but he's a powerful voice in the MAGA movement. He describes Orbán as Trump before Trump. That's sort of the quote. And if you take a look at the way that Orbán was able to consolidate power, you start by attacking the media and consolidating the media, creating your own media ecosystem. Well, what are we seeing happening in the United States? And what have we seen? Powerful Trump allies taking leadership roles when it comes to mainstream news. You're also seeing these huge sort of influential right-wing voices, whether it's in the podcasting space, whether it's in the online influencing space, those places where Trump isn't necessarily being challenged in the way that a traditional news outlet would try to hold someone to power. You take a look at redrawing electoral maps, that kind of thing. Donald Trump pushing for redistricting efforts in America ahead of the midterm elections to order
putting allies also in strategic position in government too,
absolutely.
And people who will bend to his will, in Justice Department and other places. So that's here you go. Yeah.
It's all of the sort of things we've seen Donald Trump sort of do in a supercharged way since he returned to office. We've seen it play out across 16 years of Orbán's rule in Hungary, and that is why it is significant when you see those parallels in the United States. They look to him and they found common ground there.
And European leaders are now very happy to see that it's going the other way now that Hungary is coming back to in Europe's arms. Yeah.
But I think you both keyed in on an important point, right? As much as perhaps there was a kind of negative influence from Trump, 16 years in power is a really long time. There is voter fatigue from that. But by the time we get to 2028, Trump will have been a major figure in U.S. politics for 12 years. Yeah, and you could argue, while he's only in power for 8 of those, he was an omnipresence throughout the Biden administration, right? And by the time we get to the midterms in less than a year, it's 10 years of Trump, really. Katie, let's talk a little bit about what that Trump factor could kind of mean for Republicans.
Yeah, and it sort of cites back to the overarching question we're talking about here. When Trump touches something, is he having the effect that he's hoping he's going to have? Or are we at the backlash moment? Are we at a more widespread, broader backlash moment? We're seeing it now, in Canada. Donald Trump has the ability to motivate voters, but not in the way that he wants. Donald Trump endorsing Viktor Orbán, trying to get involved in the campaign at the last minute to try and help there, didn't have the effect that he wanted. And the big concern is, or are there parallels we can take from those two examples and bring it back to an American domestic question? I think with the Canadian example, how people are motivated to get out and vote against Trump because they see him as a challenge for the Canadian economy. They see him as a challenge to threats of sovereignty. We know that he motivates Democrats to go out and vote against him. We see Democrats, even if they're running, municipal or state level campaigns, they talk about standing up to Trump. Didn't work in 2024 for Kamala Harris, but the situation might be a little bit different now. So that's.
But they still have to find, I find a national message that would resonate, articulate something that will get mobilization around the country. It seems that it's like everybody's doing a bit of his own thing right now. We'll see how it goes. They still have a few months, but that could be a challenge.
I think running strictly against Trump is not enough, right? They have to present an idea and present something that can galvanize their base. I have to say, Chuck Schumer had a pretty good tweet following Orbán's defeat. He said, "Pay attention, Donald Trump. Wannabe dictators wear out their welcome. November 2026 can't come soon enough." Certainly the case for Democrats, but we'll have to wait and see what Americans actually are feeling and thinking.
So we've got the parallels in Canada about motivating your opponents, the parallels going on right now with the election in Hungary. We could take a look at frustration over cost of living. The war in Iran has caused global energy markets to become unstable. We're seeing significant surges. The price of gas has doubled in America, which when Donald Trump ran on an economic message saying, listen, I'm going to bring down the cost of living, and he promised no new wars. And look, we got a new war. So, are there lessons to be learned there from, okay, listen, the reality is the message you sold us isn't working, and is that going to hurt Republicans in the 2026 midterm election cycle? The thing is, there's still a lot of months to go.
Yes.
That's the thing.
But I think we can see some fractures starting. And I was in CPAC, the conservative conference in Texas a few weeks ago.
Tell us about that.
And I was really surprised to see how openly, especially young MAGA men, would speak against Trump. Because, you covered those events, when you go there and you start asking a bit of tough questions, sometimes people just defend Trump all the way. This time around, no. And they talked about the Iran war first, even before I asked about it, what they thought about it. It seems, and a lot of them are just upset that Trump is, like you were mentioning, doing the exact opposite of what he promised. And I can get it together in three strikes that he has with young voters that I found. First one is nothing done on cost of living issue or housing issue. A lot of young people, young men were talking about the inability to be able to buy a home. And what is the president doing about that?
I might just not vote at all if the GOP continues to go down this path of ignoring what we want. At this point, what else do we have? We don't have homes. We barely have cars. We can't go out and eat. We can't go and socialize. We have to just kind of sit at home because we have no money.
So that's the first thing. Epstein files. This one keeps coming up. It was still the case in December when I went to the Turning Point USA event. CPAC, again, Epstein files.
We were happy and excited that, we're going to release the Epstein files. And then we saw the way they talked about it, and they, said, it's coming out, and then nothing came out. And then it said, what Epstein files? So I didn't appreciate that. I didn't like that because, we all wanted that to be released.
And then the war in Iran. And the red line was for a lot of people, boots on the ground. But they said, many of them told me, I don't even know if I'm going to go vote this fall. And I think the risk for Trump with the young voters and young men, 18-29, who supported him 54%, in a margin of 54% last election, is that these guys don't go out to vote. They won't vote Democrat, probably not, but they might just not go out. And that's where it could make a difference in flipping some tight races next fall. And you need this coalition of voters that he built in 2024, Latinos, young people, and young men especially. So if this breaks apart, there's big political risks for them. And, we feel the president is frustrated these days. We can hear it. We can see it. Does he know that this is fracturing, that he's in big trouble because of that? So I feel that as a president that is frustrated right now, and he sees that there's not a lot of time left.
I think that's a really, voter turnout, Louis. I think that's going to be really key in November for sure. I also think we're at the point in the administration where even though he's still blaming so much on the Biden administration, there's too much water under the bridge, right? He now owns all of these problems, and a lot of them he created, in particularly, of course, the price of gas with the Iran war. I mean, he has no one to put the blame on but himself there.
And the one thing is, we've seen Trump go from scandal to scandal to scandal and survive, or challenge to challenge to challenge and survive. And so many times everyone has written the political obituary on him and it never sticks. He just keeps pushing ahead. The question is whether there are any actual consequences to this, because Donald Trump has been this figure who's been in the public sphere, and no matter what he's done throughout his life, where are the consequences? Mm-hmm. Now, he might argue very differently and say, look at, some of the challenges that he's faced. He would argue that he faced a number of criminal charges. He described that as sort of being persecuted. And he talks about, I'm trying to protect you, the voter, and they're coming after me and they're trying to stop me. He's framed things in an argument like that a lot of Republican voters have supported and do get behind. But, through all the challenges, he's president.
And the opposition needs to organize too. And that's the thing. And it's not clear that the Democrats have their act together yet. When we see how they react on the Hill now and the way they organize their message is very, very fragmented. So I totally agree with you. Never rule Trump out. That's for sure. But the next month will be very interesting. But now with the gas, like 519 I saw in D.C. This week.
519?
And let me tell you, there's a lot of Americans who don't know who the new supreme leader in Iran is, but they certainly know to the dollar how much it costs to fill their tank.
In this moment, given the gas shock, given the frustration there, do we think this far out from the midterm elections, remember the vote will be held in the fall, is Donald Trump going to be more of an asset or a hindrance to Republican candidates that are out there campaigning?
Well, you see some former allies just, flipping right now and going away. And what I'm hearing also echoes here in Washington is that some political staffers of the president are moving on or looking for new jobs. So if the brand internally is not good anymore, what does it tell you? For what's coming. And so that's going to be very interesting to watch how, close allies to the president distance themselves. I was a bit surprised how fast we saw leaks about J.D. Vance, expressed his frustration about the war.
His not supporting of it.
That he resisted. I have no proof indicating that he leaked it, but it's interesting to see that even in what's portrayed in the media, we show him being distant and, advised against the war. He couldn't turn that up and, once after the midterms and say, I told you I was against it. That could be useful in Iran eventually.
I wonder about that. So this is something that I've talked about on the podcast a bunch of times, that I'm not convinced that it's going to be Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, versus J.D. Vance, the Vice President, running to be the Republican candidate. But if it does come down to those two, I do think the divide we're going to see is J.D. Vance go for the MAGA base and talk about, I said no more wars. I was fighting against this, and Marco Rubio taking up the mantle of the traditional Republican about America leading on the world stage and those kinds of things. I also wouldn't necessarily be surprised is if we take a look at J.D. Vance's political career. He has changed his position and his stance when it's convenient for him, when he sees an opportunity to seek power. Anti-Trump to pro-Trump, so pro-Trump, he's all the way to be the vice president now.
People notice that.
And so I wonder if we should be watching that, is there going to be a moment where he turns on Trump? He might not. He might, be the loyal soldier right to the end. But I found it very interesting. For Canadians who may not have read it, there's a very long, very excellent read in the New York Times, sort of walking through the blow-by-blow decision-making process in the White House as to how Donald Trump made it to this moment to declare that the U.S. and Israel would go to war and start attacking Iran. And the opposition, the way it's been framed, and even though it's citing sources, and we do not know who's speaking, according to this
so
very
many sources.
excellent
It's an
article.
amazing story.
Yeah.
It's an amazing story. It frames it that J.D. Vance, the vice president, was strongest opposed. But his position is, listen, if you're going to go, I'm going to support you.
Go big.
Yeah, go big so you end it fast. But here are all of the concerns I have. And so J.D. Vance was on Fox News on Monday night, and he was asked about that. And he said, listen, the advice I give to the president stays private. It's just for him. So he wasn't denying the story, but quite clearly.
It's convenient for him that it's out there.
We're starting to see cracks there. And again, that could end up being a significant challenge for Donald Trump. Okay, so now that we've sort of had our big conversation about that, I do want to bring in a question from a listener. Here it is from Lauren Beeson in Nanaimo, BC. And she has a question for us here at 2 Blocks from the White House about how the White House press corps works. And the question is, do you have relationships with other networks and reporters? Do you share details, or is it every person for themselves? What's it like with your fellow members of the press corps? Willy, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I'm a member of the State Department press corps, not the White House press corps. We call ourselves the best press corps in Washington. It's a smaller, tighter group. The White House press corps is huge. State Department, there's only maybe 20 or 30 of us. And yeah, we know each other all. We work together. We're kind of somewhat a unified front, all trying to cover the State Department, the ins and outs of U.S. foreign policy. And it's a lot of fun. You know, some of my great friends in Washington are members of the press corps, and, you know, mostly they're Canadians, but there's a few of us in there. It's fun to be a part of, for sure.
Louis? I almost called you Willy.
No, it's fine.
Because you're sitting in Willy's seat. How about I just call you Paul?
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. Paul with an accent. But it's true that there's a lot of collaboration between different networks, especially on my side with French networks or European networks, French language networks, Swiss Public Radio, French Public Radio. We share details, we share planifications. And, you know, sometimes foreign press during an election period in the U.S., they don't really care about us. Like politicians, we're not their priority. They want to talk to domestic, voters, and that's where their focus is on. So sometimes we just help each other out. You know, here's the person to contact if you want access to this event. Oh, I spoke with a man who speaks French in this particular event or city if you cover this race and that. So that helps. So we have this little French language mafia going on here in DC also. So that helps with the planification. But there's a lot of solidarity, and I think we need to. And it's a tough time for the press, you know, with the president attacking the media all the time. So I guess, you know, media has to stick together and help each other.
Yeah. So when it comes to the White House and the White House press corps, it's a pool, it's a team of reporters. Because there's so much demand to go into the White House and go to events with Trump, only a small group can go. It had largely been determined by the White House Press Association, the White House Correspondents Association. The White House has taken more control over that. So more pro-Trump outlets are getting direct access to the president. So that is something that is significantly changed. And you certainly see a larger, very conservative media core existing at the White House. There's plenty of traditional broadcasters and traditional outlets still there, still representing things, but there has been this shift and this change. And so when schedules are shared, they go out to everyone. Contacts are shared, they go out to everyone. My core group of friends in Washington, D.C., they're all Canadian journalists. So we'll work and we'll share. But like in terms of like if we know another colleague is working on something, we'll be respectful. We don't get in the way of like you celebrate people's successes, but you don't ever get in the way of it. But we're all competitive. We all want to break a scoop.
Of course,
we all
but
want
we're
to
in the same team at the same time. Yeah,
exactly.
A healthy camaraderie.
At the end of the day, it's about serving the public, right?
Exactly.
It's journalism as a public service. All of the early mornings, Willy. All of the glamour. All of that.
So much
Fun
glamour, Katie, when you walk in the office at 5 a.m. It's you guys have no idea. But thanks so much, Lauren. It's always fun to hear what you guys have to say, to hear what you're thinking and what you want to know from us. And again, if you have a question for us, or if you have any feedback about what you're hearing, please do send us an email at WashingtonPod, all one word, at cbc.ca. Once again, that's WashingtonPod at cbc.ca. It's a highlight of our week to hear what our listeners have to say and to attempt to give them the best answers to the questions that they have.
And before we go, because we have Louis Blouin here, I want to ask you one quick question.
Yes.
In the 8 months you've been here, what has surprised you the most?
I think the experience that surprised me the most was going to those briefings at the White House. Because there's something a bit surreal about it. But it's also all the focus and, attention it gets and it generates from that little room all over the world. Like, we're in the center of the world here. That's what I think strikes me the most. What happens here, a sentence, a word that is pronounced by this spokesperson can have an impact overseas. And that's quite staggering. Like, Ottawa had its impact too, but I mean, here you feel like you're in the middle of it. And it's fantastic.
I think Louis made a point that I think our listeners would find interesting. It is a really little room.
Oh my goodness.
It's a wardrobe.
It might look glamorous on television, but it is a tiny, cramped, essentially makeshift room on the side of the White House.
Built on the pool.
You walk in.
That?
Yeah, exactly. You walk in and you're like, this is it?
Excellent. And just know that if you ever see any of us at the White House briefing, that in the moment when you can see us on camera, you just know that someone is breathing on our neck and we can feel it. So if you like the feeling of someone breathing on your neck, then the White House briefing is for you.
That's for you.
Oh my goodness. So on that really visual note, I could actually, as we're talking about it, I could like feel it and I'm getting like a bad chill. I feel like I've been teleported over to the White House. Okay, so you can leave us a comment on Spotify and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Willy, thank you so much for taking time out of your day in Toronto to come and chat with us. Louis.
Well, I guess, it was a privilege to be here, but Paul is going to be back next with the real Paul.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.